It was 6:30 a.m. on September 2nd, 2025, when U.S. surveillance screens lit up with a single target. A Venezuelan speedboat was tearing across the Caribbean Sea at full throttle. Its twin outboards carved a sharp white scar through the waves, carrying armed men who believed this was just another smuggling run. What they didn't know was that the ocean around them had already become a cage. High above, American satellites were staring down, their thermal sensors picking up the boat's exhaust trail like a glowing arrow against the dark sea. Thousands of miles away, analysts watched its every move in real time. What the smugglers thought was freedom of open water was, in reality, a trap closing around them. At 25,000 feet, a U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon reconnaissance aircraft circled. Its radar sliced through clouds, painting the boat's position with mathematical precision. Even the encrypted radio bursts sent back to Caracas weren't private anymore. The Poseidon was listening, recording, and feeding it all into the Navy's vast combat network. On the horizon, just a speck at first, came the silhouette of an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer. 9,000 tons of American steel, bristling with missiles and sensors. To the smugglers, it was invisible. To the U.S. Navy, the boat's fate was already sealed. What seemed like a routine smuggler run was about to turn into something much bigger, a global incident. By the end of the day, that boat would be destroyed, Caracas would call it an act of war, and the world would watch the U.S. Navy sink a cartel-linked vessel in international waters. The lesson would be brutal. Escape was never possible. The smugglers didn't know it, but the moment they throttled up, they'd entered what the U.S. Navy calls a kill box. The term sounds dramatic, but in doctrine, it's simple. Once a target crosses into a mapped sector, multiple layers of surveillance and firepower overlap until escape becomes mathematically impossible. That's exactly what the Venezuelan boat had stumbled into. Satellites weren't just taking pictures. They were tracking heat signatures, electronic chatter, even the faint hydrocarbon trails in the boat's exhaust. Every second the engines roared, the data piled higher. The smugglers thought they were fast, but their top speed, around 50 knots, meant nothing against a battle space stitched together by sensors moving at the speed of light. The next layer was the Poseidon. Think of it not just as an aircraft, but as a flying command post. Its AN/APY-10 radar can sweep hundreds of miles of ocean in a single pass, detecting vessels as small as a skiff. The crew didn't just mark the boat, they shadowed it. Each course change, each maneuver, the Poseidon mirrored, silently locking the target inside its electronic crosshairs. And it wasn't just watching, it was listening. Every encrypted radio call to Venezuela was intercepted and tagged, archived on U.S. servers before the smugglers even finished talking. Meanwhile, on the water, the trap was tightening. An Arleigh Burke-class destroyer maneuvered into position. To casual observers, it might have looked like a distant speck on the horizon, but beneath its steel decks were 96 vertical launch cells capable of firing everything from surface-to-air missiles to Tomahawks. Against a smuggler boat, it was overkill. But this destroyer was part of something larger, a network. Its SPY-1 radar, part of the Aegis combat system, quietly fed data to every Allied ship and aircraft in range. The smugglers weren't being hunted by a single vessel. They were caught in an invisible web of overlapping surveillance, weapons, and coordination. The Venezuelan smugglers thought they had options. They didn't. They could turn north, veer south, or sprint west toward their coastline. But every heading had already been plotted, every escape vector covered by layers of American surveillance. From the moment their engines roared to life, their fate was sealed inside an invisible kill box. When the order finally came, it wasn't cinematic. There were no shouted warnings or high-speed chases. In the Combat Information Center aboard the destroyer, the Poseidon crew transmitted final target confirmation. Fire control radars locked. A precision strike followed, quick, clinical, and devastating. In a moment the smugglers never saw coming, their fiberglass hull erupted into flames. The vessel was destroyed in seconds. Escape had never been possible. For U.S. commanders, the operation was a textbook success. For the smugglers, there had never been a chance. The ocean they believed was their escape route had become a cage built from satellites, aircraft, and steel. Within hours, Washington announced the strike as a counter-narcotics victory. According to official statements, the boat wasn't random. It was tied to Tren de Aragua, one of Venezuela's most powerful criminal networks. Intelligence suggested the vessel was carrying cartel operatives and narcotics bound for regional distribution. The White House claimed the operation eliminated 11 suspected cartel operatives in international waters. President Donald Trump publicly amplified the announcement, declaring the strike proof of America's resolve to hunt cartel elements anywhere they operate. But while Washington framed it as a clean military action, the reaction elsewhere was anything but calm. Caracas erupted. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro took to state television, fists clenched, denouncing the strike as outright aggression. He claimed the men on board were Venezuelan citizens killed without trial, and that the attack was a violation of sovereignty and international law. His fiery address transformed what U.S. officials called a counter-narcotics mission into a geopolitical flashpoint overnight. Allies stayed quiet, but analysts around the world immediately flagged the danger. If major power, as claimed the right to sink vessels on suspicion alone, then international waters could turn into contested kill zones. The implications stretched far beyond one destroyed speedboat. Inside the Pentagon, the value of the operation wasn't measured only in firepower, it was in data. Every smuggler run is a live intelligence exercise. This one provided a treasure trove. The smugglers had made radio calls to handlers in Venezuela. They'd plotted courses, chosen fuel stops, and transmitted encrypted bursts. All of it was intercepted and tagged. The Navy didn't just erase a vessel, it mapped part of Tren-de-Aragua's logistics network. Every voice on the radio, every frequency used, every transmission pattern was fed into U.S. databases. The next time any of those signatures appeared, the system would recognize them instantly. The same applied to tactics. How did smugglers react when shadowed by aircraft? Which routes did they prefer at night versus day? Did they sprint for Venezuelan waters under pressure? Or try to blend in with commercial traffic? Each answer gave analysts new predictive tools for future interceptions. In military intelligence, this is called pattern of life data, and it's priceless. U.S. forces have perfected the art of turning adversary aggression or recklessness into intelligence gold. When Venezuelan F-16s buzzed the USS Jason Dunham days later, the destroyer quietly logged their radar signatures and comms, turning a provocation into a data set. When Chinese Z-10 helicopters tried to rattle U.S. patrols in the South China Sea, they unknowingly exposed their electronic fingerprints. Even Houthi missile launches in the Red Sea gave away infrared plumes for future analysis. The smugglers thought they were running contraband. In reality, they were feeding a surveillance machine far bigger than themselves. In modern warfare, the side that controls data controls the fight. And on that September morning, the United States made that painfully clear. Within hours of the strike, the political shockwaves began to spread. On Venezuelan state television, Nicolas Maduro appeared before the cameras, fists clenched, voice rising with each sentence. He condemned the destruction of the smugglers' vessel as an act of war, accusing Washington of murder and branding the strike a violation of Venezuela's sovereignty. To a nation already crushed under sanctions and economic collapse, the incident became a rallying cry. Maduro ordered the Venezuelan armed forces to full alert. State media broadcast images of aging F-16 fighters roaring down cracked airstrips, their engines screaming as ground crews scrambled around them. Soldiers marched through coastal garrisons in synchronized formation, their boots striking the pavement like war drums. It was all designed to send one message: Venezuela would not be intimidated. But behind the bravado, the truth was grimmer. Venezuela's air force was aging. Its fleet of U.S.-made F-16s was decades old and starved of spare parts. Its navy was a fraction of the power station just beyond its shores. Caracas couldn't face Washington in open combat, but it could provoke. That provocation came just 3 days later. 2 Venezuelan F-16s roared low over the USS Jason Dunham, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer patrolling international waters. The Pentagon called it reckless and dangerous. From the deck, sailors watched the jets scream past at altitudes so low that shock waves rippled across the Caribbean surface. For Caracas, it was a symbolic act of defiance. For the U.S. Navy, it was a gift. Every radar pulse, every radio call, every heat signature from those jets was captured and stored. What Venezuela intended as a show of strength became another intelligence harvest. The destroyer logged their radar frequencies, tracking patterns, and encrypted comms, valuable data that could be used in future confrontations. But the danger of escalation was very real. U.S. commanders had standing orders: hold fire unless directly threatened. Yet in the era of supersonic aircraft, the line between provocation and attack can blur in seconds. A single misread radar lock, an accidental missile release, or a nervous trigger finger could have turned a buzzing flyby into the opening shot of a war. Washington's response was deliberate, not restraint, reinforcement. Within a week, 10 F-35 Lightning II stealth fighters deployed to Puerto Rico, barely 2 hours flight from Venezuelan airspace. These weren't relics from the 1980s. They were America's crown jewels. Fifth-generation aircraft built to dismantle enemy defenses before they even knew they were targeted. The message was unmistakable. If Venezuela wanted to gamble in the skies, the United States was prepared to raise the stakes. The ripple effects extended across the region. Governments from Colombia to the Lesser Antilles watched nervously as the Caribbean filled with U.S. warships and combat patrols. Commercial shipping companies rerouted tankers to avoid potential flashpoints. Diplomatic channels buzzed. Analysts warned that a single destroyed speedboat had become a catalyst, threatening to destabilize an entire hemisphere. What began as a precise counter-narcotics strike against a single cartel-linked vessel had morphed into a confrontation between two states, turning the Caribbean into the stage of a modern geopolitical standoff. In the space of a week, the balance of power beneath those blue waters shifted. What the smugglers thought would be a routine run had dragged Venezuela and the United States into a dangerous new game, one where every radar ping, every intercepted transmission, and every maneuver carried consequences. By the end of the first week of September 2025, the Caribbean Sea looked deceptively calm. Blue water rolled under merchant ships, tankers traced their usual routes, and the sun cast a golden sheen across the waves. But beneath that surface, the balance of power had shifted. One Venezuelan speedboat, packed with smugglers who believed they were untouchable, had ignited a geopolitical chain reaction that neither Caracas nor Washington could ignore. For the smugglers, the ocean represented freedom, endless water, fast boats, and the illusion of escape. For the U.S. Navy, it was a proving ground. Satellites, patrol aircraft, and destroyers worked in silent coordination, building a net where speed meant nothing and distance offered no safety. Modern warfare didn't rely on cinematic chases or last-minute shootouts. It relied on networks, on information, on precision so exact that escape became a mathematical impossibility. That destroyed boat wasn't just a tactical victory, it was a signal, a test, and a trigger. It exposed the growing entanglement between Venezuela's criminal networks and state apparatus, and it demonstrated how quickly a single interdiction could escalate from law enforcement to near conflict. In Caracas, the aftermath was political theater. Maduro roared on television. His jets buzzed American destroyers. Soldiers paraded on beaches. But none of it changed reality. Venezuela's military was aging, under-resourced, and deeply outmatched. Its ships couldn't challenge U.S. destroyers. Its fighters couldn't match American stealth jets. And its tactics, every radar pulse, every encrypted message, every maneuver, were already stored in U.S. databases. Every act of defiance revealed more of Venezuela's hand. In Washington, the tone was colder. Pentagon briefings emphasized legal justification, precision, and control. Intelligence analysts dissected the operation frame by frame, extracting valuable data for future missions. Diplomats, meanwhile, worked behind closed doors to manage the political fallout, knowing that the world was watching how America wielded its power at sea. Regional allies walked a cautious line. Some quietly backed the U.S., seeing the strike as necessary to curb cartel influence. Others hesitated, wary of setting precedents that might one day be used against them. The Caribbean, once treated as a quiet backwater, had become a theater of power politics. And through it all, the U.S. Navy continued its patrols, steady, silent, relentless. Destroyers cut through the Caribbean with the confidence of a force that knew it held every advantage. For them, the incident was logged, analyzed, and folded into the endless rhythm of maritime enforcement. But for Venezuela, it was humiliation cloaked as defiance. This was the new reality. The line between cartel warfare, state provocations, and international conflict had blurred. A single boat, a single strike, had forced two nations into a dangerous dance of pressure, posturing, and power. And in that contest, Hesitation sinks faster than ships.